I have always loved coming to Westerham. It's the kind of place that's in a world of its own, a quiet, sleepy backwater and surrounded by such lovely countryside. Just outside Westerham is the very grand Squerry's Court, a magnificent red brick building and the seat of the Ward family. I always love coming here. The grounds and gardens are always so pretty and well kept. It was here, just 5 years ago in 1876, when events took place that would bring Westerham into the modern world. Events that were shrouded with uncertainty and rumour. I remember it was market day in Westerham, and after buying a few things there, I had come here to Squerry's Court to have tea with Lady Harriet. My husband, the eminent Dr. Thompson, had already had a busy morning seeing some patients and was due to meet with Lady Harriet's brother-in-law, Colonel Charles Ward, and some other rather distinguished gentlemen. It must have been an important meeting, because Mr. Dirtnell had arrived. He's a very rich man in Braisted. And not only him, but the Squire of Braisted Place, Captain William Tipping, a very well-to-do gentleman. You can always recognise Mr. Tipping with his large bushy beard. And that's the very distinguished Colonel. The gentleman had been poring over lots of documents and maps, and generally engaged in what seemed quite serious conversation. I had known for some time that there were some very exciting but top-secret plans to build a new railway line from Dunton Green to Westerham.
When, quite frankly, it can all be resolved at the Common Sessions Committee next Wednesday.
I was to find out later that this meeting had something to do with raising some enormous sums of money.
Well, that's approaching £50,000, and that's assuming favourable ground and weather conditions during construction.
Thank you. Lady Harriet decided to adjourn to the garden and out of earshot of the men. A pity, really, as I could no longer overhear what was going on in the drawing room.
Oh, yes, please.
Maybe I could persuade Lady Harriet to be a little more forthright. She always seemed to know a good deal more than me.
You know, my husband seems to work such long hours these days and hardly ever finds time to tell me what's going on. And even when he does, he's a bit reticent on important matters. So do tell me, what's really going on?
Well, it's quite complicated. You see, the Colonel and the gentlemen inside are getting ready to attend a quite crucial committee meeting in London, at the House of Commons no less, in preparation for the reading of what they're calling the Westerham Valley Railway Bill. You see, without approval from Parliament and the money that the Colonel is attempting to raise to underwrite the project, the railway simply can't be built.
But I hear Westerham's brewery manager, George Dodd, and that nurseryman, John Cattell, are attending the meeting. Why on earth should they be going?
Well, along with quite a few others, Mr. Dodd and Mr. Cattell have been invited to attend the committee meeting as witnesses on behalf of the Westerham traders. And under cross-examination, they will try to persuade the chairman and the committee that Westerham really do need this railway line.
Oh, my goodness. I wouldn't like to be in their shoes.
So it is most important that the Colonel's efforts on this occasion do not fail, and heaven forbid are jeopardised by anyone who is opposed to the line.
Well, I'm getting very concerned. We've now got Samuel Ruford, as well as Tom, raising objections, embankments, cuttings, severance, the usual thing.
Lady Harriet must have been reading the Colonel's mind. The meeting at Squerry's had become tense. There was one man on the Colonel's mind, a man vehemently opposed to the line, a rich landowner in Dunton Green by the name of Mr. Tong, and over whose land the line would pass.
But it's his neighbour, William Tong, who's going to be the thorn in our side.
Unless Tong can be convinced of the residential value of his severed land.
I doubt it. He's more concerned with his view. If that man succeeds...
Tong could not be allowed to wreck their plans, nor should he be allowed to sway the opinion of the parliamentary committee meeting, now only days away.
Nothing. It will be a disaster.
I left the somewhat disturbed serenity of Squaries behind and made my way back into Westerham to catch the omnibus back to Sevenoaks. On board was a friend of mine, Hattie. I was dying to tell her what I'd heard, although, in hindsight, I think I should have been a little more discreet.
Good morning, Mrs. Thompson.
Hello, Hattie. I haven't seen you for a while. Have you been away?
Yes, I have. I've been staying with my aunt in Godstone. I'm so glad that the omnibus has turned up on time today. Otherwise, I'm going to be late for my appointment.
Yes, I am going to Sevenoaks. In fact, I'm going to see an old friend of mine who's not very well, Violet Allison. You know her? She's a friend of the rector's wife, Mrs. Bartlett. Violet's been poorly for some time now and really can't get out and about like she used to. So I'm hoping to go over there and do a few things for her and cheer her up a bit.
Oh, that's very nice of you. I mean, perhaps it's just as well she doesn't have to use this awful omnibus service. I don't know how we put up with it. I find it so uncomfortable.
Yes, it is very uncomfortable. And worst of all, it does take such a long time to get to Sevenoaks.
Yes.
Mind you, I've heard a rumour. They're planning to build a railway. Have you heard about this?
No.
Well, I was talking to Lady Harriet this morning at Squares, and apparently she was telling me that Colonel Ward, you know, the distinguished colonel, he's working on something with my husband, but it's all supposed to be top secret. And there are a few other people involved as well. But I believe it's something to do with a new railway they're planning from Dunton Green, I think, to Westerham. Excited, Hattie. You know they've had 2 previous attempts to build the railway and both of those failed.
Yes, well, maybe. But anything's better than this omnibus, provided it doesn't go too fast. Do you know that a steam engine can go faster than a good horse? Over 30 miles an hour. It frightens me.
It's quite safe, Hattie. Anyway, Hattie, I very much doubt it will ever get built. Some of the landowners would never agree to giving up their land. And after all, it is only a rumour. As far as I can see, we'll have to endure this omnibus service for quite some time.
I don't know why it has to take so long. Do you know it took me 3 hours to get to Sevenoaks yesterday?
3 hours? What, to go 5 miles?
Yes, that's right, but it stops at every public house on the way. I don't...
The day of reckoning has arrived all right, and a pretty austere chairman we had. Still, he needed to be if he was going to tackle Mr. Tong later on. This was Colonel Ward's representative, Mr. Sharp.
How often does this omnibus go?
Twice a day, each way.
And how many people does it carry?
I suppose it would carry about 15 people.
Well, I suppose the proposed railway would only be required to carry 15 people. Is that not right, Mr. Sharp?
That wouldn't be the case, Mr. Chairman. I have 5 or 6 conveyances.
Thank goodness he was able to stand his ground and seemed to know just how awful that turnpike road to Sevenoaks really is.
Sevenoaks. The brewers, however, with their huge wagons, are always on the road, often with 4 or 5 horses, and in many parts the road is extremely narrow, and this makes it very difficult and extremely dangerous to pass.
Well said, Mr. Sharp. And now the man who clogs up the turnpike road with his huge wagons, the brewer himself, Mr. George Dodd.
There for 11 years.
Now, I believe you use a substantial quantity of coal in the course of the year.
Yes, I do.
I can't say I've always found Mr. Dodd the most agreeable man in Westerham, but at least he seemed able to add conviction to our much-needed railway line.
And what does that cost you to cart?
It costs me 5 shillings a tonne using the turnpike road from Sevenoaks, whereas it costs only 14 shillings a tonne to bring the same quantity, the 300 miles by rail from the north of England to Sevenoaks.
So, in other words...
I had no idea how expensive it was to cart coal just the 5 miles from Sevenoaks into Westerham.
Yes, that's right. And in addition to coal, I have to cart grain, oats,
I get the
barley,
feeling
that's
Mr.
about
Dodd
500
should do
tonnes,
fairly well
building
from the
materials,
railway.
100 tonnes,
But what's his opinion of Mr. Tong?
So you believe the line will do you good. But tell me, do you think it will do anybody any harm, including Mr. Tong?
Oh, not at all. In fact, I think it will improve Mr. Tong's property.
Thank you, Mr. Dodd. Name, please?
John Cattell.
You are a nurseryman and a seedsman at Westerham?
That's right.
I was so surprised when I heard nurseryman John Cattell had been asked to appear as a witness. Not the sort of man I would care to converse with. However, I was pleasantly surprised. Clearly able to stand up to our chairman and the chairman's perception of Westerham. Cattell was having none of it.
For cartage.
Well, what about other goods traffic? You must have a quantity of goods traffic to justify this line. Are there any manufacturers in Westerham?
Well, there's a brewery. Well, there's two breweries, in fact.
Mr. Cattell, there's a brewery in every village.
With respect, Mr. Chairman, there isn't, and ours is a town, not a village.
Well, is it purely for the brewery that you want this railway?
No, it's for all of the inhabitants, including the brewery.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cattell.
Take the Bible in your right hand.
This is Mr. Glover. He's the civil engineer for the railway, and probably the least biased of all the witnesses. He was able to give the chairman technical details of the line. But it was Glover's knowledge of the main petitioner, Mr. Tong, that appeared to interest the chairman most of all.
I believe you are a member of the Institute of Civil Engineers and the engineer who has laid out the plans for the line.
Yes, I am.
Do you know whether this line is likely to be visible from Mr. Tong's house?
Possibly during the winter when the trees are bare, but not during the summer.
So, in your opinion, is this line likely to cause any special injury to Mr. Tong or his estate?
None whatsoever.
Thank you, Mr. Glover.
Take the Bible in your right hand and repeat these words.
I swear by Almighty.
The room had fallen silent. Here was the man most likely to upset the apple cart, Mr. Tong. Everyone was on the edge of their seats. How would the chairman deal with this bad-tempered man?
Your name, please?
William Tong.
Mr. Tong, do you object to the proposed line coming through your property and taking a portion of your land as proposed?
Yes, I do object.
In your judgment, will it interfere with the residential value of your property?
Yes, it will.
What grounds could Tong possibly use to justify his well-publicised objections to the railway? The chairman remained objective as we all listened to Tong.
20 feet high. What effect will this have on your property, Mr. Tong?
It will spoil my estate and my view.
Well, what kind of view is there from your house?
Well, it's a magnificent view. I think it's about the prettiest view in the county of Kent.
But it is suggested by some that the railway would not interrupt the view from your house. What do you say to that?
It will interrupt it considerably. The valley is rather a narrow one, and anything like a railway embankment between the river and my house would entirely destroy my estate.
But Mr. Tong, your residence is 1,000 yards away from the line.
Mr. Tong seemed to confine his objections to his spoilt view. Surely there was more up his sleeve.
Every inch of it.
Well, severance aside, what damage will this line do you?
Well, it simply does this. I like my estate as a man might like his garden. It cuts my estate in two and spoils it.
But I don't see what damage it does. It's not cutting your garden, it's cutting your fields.
And you?
So what damage can this line possibly do you?
It will ruin my estate, my house and my view. And what's more, I shall see the smoke of the engine every time it starts out from Dunton Green till it gets to Westerham.
You'll see smoke from the engine? Do you seriously think that that is a reason why Westerham should not have a railway?
Yes, I do, and I think it's a great objection.
Mr. Tong, we have residents, traders and businessmen in Westerham, all expressing considerable desire for a rail connection. And you object on the grounds that you will see smoke from the engine?
I do! And I say every man for himself.
This is not quite every man for himself. This is what should be done for your neighbours.
I beg your pardon? I want to protect and preserve my estate for myself and my children.
I was on that very first train. Yes, we were going by train to Westerham station. It was wonderful. And then, to celebrate the opening of the line, a banquet in Westerham Town Hall. I don't think we had ever enjoyed ourselves so much. So much good food, so much wine and champagne, so many toasts and speeches of congratulation. They were all here. The chairman, Sir Edward Watkins of the South Eastern Railway Company, he was congratulating Colonel Ward. The slightly intoxicated Samuel Reeford, I never knew quite what he was talking about. And then Mr. Fox, he seemed happy he could now get to London 10 times a day. Lord Bradbourne wanted to see a new mayor in Westerham. Then came our local builder, Mr. Richard Dirtnell. He seemed to think today was just as good as his wedding day. Oh, and Colonel Ward, everyone's favourite, the man behind our new railway, a man with a wry sense of humour. And of course, my husband, Dr. Thompson.
Ladies and gentlemen, would you raise your glasses and toast prosperity to Westerham?
I know this line very well. I have walked the length of this line and I know the district very well, almost every inch of it. Anyone who's heard that masses of people come to Westerham Station is grossly misinformed. I have discovered that very few travel on this line to visit Westerham. I know it's a nice sight to see this little train coming along the track with grass sprouting up between the lines, but the railways are facing a crisis. I have to put the railways on a sound financial footing by cutting costs and eliminating inefficiency. Inevitably, branch lines will be cut out, and in this respect, the decision has been taken. The Dunton Green to Westerham branch line will be closed.
To the dismay of everyone, Transport Minister Mr. Marples had dealt the final death knell. But a rumour was circulating that the real reason behind the premature closure of the line was that it was in the way of the route of a proposed new South Orbital Road, the M25. But the government ensured a swift secretarial denial.
I have made careful inquiries and can assure you that any such rumour is unfounded.
Amid tears of anguish, all efforts to preserve the railway line and to run it independently failed. Land was compulsorily purchased, the old track torn up, bulldozers moved in, construction of the M25 began. And now, almost 4 decades later, we have this. No doubt Mr. Tong would have been pleased to see the demise of the Western Valley Railway, but just imagine his reaction if he could see what replaced it.
And once more I shall see the smoke of the engine every time it starts out from Dunton Green till it gets to Westerham. And once more I shall see